Hey everybody, this is Brad Dyke, reaching out to say hi to everybody out there. Hope you're all doing good. Um, in this video, we are going to talk about the nature of how to bring people into focus with DevOps. Now, the key thing about DevOps that you have to understand is the nature of DevOps in its environment. You see, the environment is unique. You want your people in DevOps to be successful. You want to be successful overall as you're trying to transition from a CapEx, OpEx strategy and move into a service provider mindset. In my days with NetApp, we would call this thinking like a service provider. That's true. With that kind of construct in your head, operations, which is the whole picture of keeping everything up and running, sustained, ready for failover, business continuity, and all the other wonderful key operational capacities. And of course, in the middle of that is DevOps. With that, we have a roadmap and a strategy which can get us from how do we get started to, okay, now we can do this. I've done a lot of 101s on DevOps, and I recommend that you go to some of those videos to learn other components and basics that you might be looking for. I apologize, I do these in scale, so they are a little bit different in regards to one item at a time. The people who I'm talking to right now that I'm focusing this video on are basically tier 5, at least 5-year vets of the operations environment, and or who are already in charge of specific services out there, but are now looking to move into a more contiguous style deployment strategy using DevOps and CI/CD. Well, the biggest hurdle about CI/CD is that it doesn't exist, which means you have no footprint to work with from the start. So how do you start? Okay, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, or keep it simple, sweet, whichever one works best for you. The key thing there is complexity kills. It really does. Complexity also serves the ego. Keeping it simple, stupid is what allows you to do it 200 times in a span of a 3-hour period. That is the first thing to think about. Secondly, don't try to invent it. Just fully document how you do things today and begin to take control over that process in a semi-software configuration style format. In other words, you probably have admins out there who have been really great. They're one-hit wonders. They're awesomes. They're on many topics. They've deployed a lot of stuff that's become legacy. They're critical. They're functional. They're a single point of failure, by the way. And they don't want to deal with it anymore. Yeah. So what do? Well, there is simple. First, you want to revitalize those people. You want to give them some hope. But hey, this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. And begin to let them mentor you on the processes of sustainment for how it's done today, so you can do one critical component. Note number 1. Write it down. Make an standard operating procedure of the steps. Walk through the steps and make sure they work. When you have an SOP or standard operating procedure, it is now outside of the head of the individual who knows all knowing, and now is on paper or in your Confluence site or wherever you might store the information, ready for availability. Now, if you write down the SOP process, then you know what you need to look at, which if you can identify that, and you do this about 20 or 30 more times to cover the bulk of your applications, APIs, tier structures, or resource deployment resources such as Terraform, Ansible, and so on, you will have a pattern. This is your blueprint that starts you off on doing DevOps. Playbook. The playbook is what sets the environment of execution. It means that it's going to have a secondary document called a run book. Now, if any of you have done project management, this is more of an operations process when we bring those together for execution process, because the SOP under the actual playbook Executing against multiple targets that are identified in the run book gives you everything you need to set the tensor for an automated process. See how it works? So let's go over it again. You first want to get to your right resources and learn how everybody does it. How do you guys do it today? What is the process? And document it. Document it, document it, document it. Your director of operations should be the enforcer on that to make sure that everybody is sharing the information and getting it documented and is vetting it. That's the other part of SOP. That means walk through the steps again and again to make sure that it reads well, it's easy to follow, and it makes sense and it's executable. Many people will write a document and walk away. I've seen that too many times. Hold the writer accountable to streamline his processes so that the least functional admin in your admin team can execute the task. That's a good tip. With that being said, you've got the SOP. And now everybody's thinking the same way. Okay, we do code updates. Okay, we wrote the SOP for that. We did patch deployments. Here's the SOP for that. We have security updates. Here's the SOP for that. We have Apache changes, PHP changes, and so on and so on and so on. If it's a service or a function or a task that's on an environment or in Docker or whatever, you can write an SOP. What does this do? Well, this gives you your kickoff for being able to develop your playbook. Again, the playbook is the culmination of SOPs brought together for the pre, the execution, and the post process. What do I mean? Well, when you're in a playbook, operations has to do things first, not DevOps. Operations does that work. It can range from snapshotting to data retention or a policy or a backup process, but they go through their 1, 2, 3 pre-work. It also involves communication to the customer base. It's a series of steps, and they're significant. They're usually called the make and break steps. It starts off first with defining the role, doing the discovery, understanding the requirements, identifying the customer base, communicating correctly at the right levels for the customer base, dry run practice of the playbook and run book, execution, completion, confirmation that services are operational, and then from there, wide system monitoring and 7-day monitor windows to make sure that performance and other things aren't prevaricated. Now, everything I just described to you was the pre-work. The execution, of course, is the DevOps work that has the playbook and the run book, and then the post-work, which means did it come back correctly? Did it report right? Does it have the same performance or better? And to have what we call a sustainment model for monitoring, using your monitoring tools for the next several days. And this allows you to be able to go out and do quite a bit in a single task, DevOps deployment. Now, this is the secret sauce for getting your basic idea of how things are. But everything I just described to you is taking how they did things today, streamlining it into a well-defined process. It's still the same way you deploy today, but it's faster, leaner, cleaner, and it's prepped now for investigating automation. Now, automation is a tricky word. You can use automation by Jenkins deployment. You can use scripting control mechanisms as well as bash sessioning. You can do a variety of other things out there that which give you the capacity to do what you want to do. So, with that being said, the next challenge you've got to have to deal with is, okay, now I know how we do it, and we pretty much maximize the potential performance we could get as is with the way we do it today. Kudos. That's 30% of the battle right there. You know how it's done. You know the processes, and you know the steps, and you know the right way to track how you do the update processes, and so on. The next step is preparing for automation. So you have to maintain everything you just discovered and did for a span of time while you bring in comparison paired models. In other words, two different functional entities. You have today's way of DevOps and then the goal of automation of DevOps in the future. And they have to run side by side. And every core function has to be vetted and tested correctly before automation can actually come in and take over. So what does that basically mean? Let's say you're going to do a PHP configuration sustainment, right? Or better yet, let's do a patch upgrade for PHP. Well, those are X amount of steps, and the runbook shows how many PHP servers we're going to have to update. The playbook shows us the pre, the middle, and the end workloads to get it done. And if we have 195 PHP servers, then we're going to do those steps times 195. There's the pain. But we've got it identified, we've streamlined it, we've maximized the overall return with what we have, and mostly manual process. So we can now basically bring up a paired system, and the way I would preferably recommend it be done is that you drive most of your automation primary workloads as low-hanging fruit jobs. What does that mean? Well, don't necessarily run it through Jenkins. Yes, you can use Jenkins or other engines like Jenkins and GitHub. In my case, GitHub and Jenkins are the preferred as the backdoor engines that execute the jobs. Yes, but use your CMDB platform. That's also known as a help desk platform, or in my case, Jira. And you might have a co-support tool known as Confluence or an HP help desk or something like that out there as well. And what these can do is they can be coded to integrate with GitHub and Jenkins and allow you to do what we call low-hanging fruit automation deployments. So where and what is that? Well, some of the workload that you have out there, and is very good workload, especially for testing automation, is the developer and code writing needs for on-the-fly development. So if a coder's out there, he needs a Docker instance for X. Well, that's a process, and it takes X amount of steps in a manual 1, 2, 3, and so on and so on. But what if I could say, okay, you're a coder and you're in the development classifier. I can restrict your resources so you're very low end. You're going to have just what you need, and you can tell me how much you need out of the pool that's available. And if it goes too high, then it's no longer automated. It would be partially automated. It would require what's called an approval process automation. But for now, it's low-hanging fruit. You're a developer. You're a sandboxer. You're a coder. And you need to do a test run for 6 days or 3 days or 1 day or something like that, you could put a help desk, a Jira help desk ticket in, put the request in, and as long as it meets the low-hanging fruit requirements, in other words, it doesn't cost me much, boom. 5 minutes later, you have everything you need. No human was involved. An email notification and a ticket is created, set, complied, and closed, giving notification to management that this has happened and its end date is X. And we'll have a communication window to say, okay, your 3 days are up. Are you good to go? Can we go ahead and start removing the resources and free up those resources for the next guy or gal? So with that being said, your process is really in a capacity that allows you to do quite a bit when you start doing low-hanging fruit, and allows your teams to cut their teeth on some fairly easy stuff to work with. Now, approval DevOps deployments are also automated, and they're designed for scale. Now, scale, that's a tricky word. Many of us think of scale as growing and shrinking resources as needed. No. Scale is also compute value resourcing. That's also different than the first one. Scale means to be able to adjust and bring on new platforms. So depending on where you're coming from, be careful about using the word scaling. In this case, scaling your resources to meet your coders and your developers' requirements, as well as following your 3-in-1 policy, which basically means nothing gets to production until it goes through testing, is vetted, goes through quality for Q&A review, and then finally can go to stage and then prod for deployment. That's how it should always be done, because it safely allows us to bring product in, and we become experts in the process from test to prod on how to deploy it. So that's why we now go to the second level of DevOps deployment, known as approval DevOps deployments automation. And what that is basically is very similar to the first one, but it deals with greater resources. And with greater resources means greater money expenditure, which means an approval process has to be brought to the equation and may require what's called a vetting process to make sure, is number one, this is a worthwhile investment, and number two, what is the scale of the resource? And once we know that, and we can define those in the predefined tables, we set the tables and execute. Those resources would be created within 20 or 30 minutes. It takes a little longer, and it is very fast, but not as fast as low-hanging fruit automation on a ticket system. So this is how you progress to that capacity. And that's what I'm doing right now with my present company. Unlike the company before where it was already predefined, and you're learning the internal mechanisms of the automation environment. The key thing here is understanding that as you're going into this realm, the days of just being a hardware guy are kind of falling behind the doors, because you really now have to brush up on the software skills again and get solid with them, but go to the basics, go to the open source, and synchronize yourself with what you're doing today. Make sure if you're in DevOps or you're an operations oversight leader or something like that, that you first identify those tools that you need to brush up on. Then make sure you get them squared away in support of your bash and scripting and processes like that would support Ansible, or you want to do Terraform. And then of course you've got your Jenkins and GitHub engines, and of course you've got your Jira, and you've got your Confluence processes, and of course you've got your guidance steps. Now that's the last part of this. We use a tool known as New Relic and APM, which allows us to build a mechanism that can tell us currently where we're at in a DevOps deployment strategy. May it be a MariaDB deployment, or may it be a PHP deployment, or a config change, or whatever. That process is still kind of loosey-goosey in the industry, and we're still kind of having to do it on our own, which is okay. There's no problem with that, because with tools like Dynatrace or New Relic or Datadog, you can use a concentric single pane of glass for your operations that also tracks DevOps deployments, as well as use your analytical AI integration for your reporting tools so that you can proactively catch things before they become critical. Complicated. I'll talk to that in my next video. But with this being the case, I wanted to go over this particular video because the key thing here is, again, understanding the nature of what you do today is paramount, so you can document it, streamline it, put it into an execution team effect. Then you're ready to start the process of integrating your scripting to a more effective way where you can eventually get to automation. So with that being said, this is Brad Dyke. I'm going to let you guys go. Have a great week, and you guys take care. Bye-bye.